February 24th, 2023 marked exactly 1 year since Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a special military operation, an all-out invasion of its former sovereign territory, Ukraine, by sea, land and air. It was initially thought the operation would take a short while, but the Ukrainians pushed back hard, and with a steady flow of military supplies from the United States, UK and Germany, among others, there is seemingly no end in sight to the conflict. The conflict, according to the UN, has so far claimed 8,000 human lives and left more than 13,300 injured. The one-year anniversary last month coincided with two very important developments. A telephone conversation, the first of its kind, between President Museveni and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky, and later,
we shall now begin the voting process.
A UN General Assembly vote calling for an end to the war. 141 countries backed the resolution calling for a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. 32 countries, including Uganda, abstained from voting, while 7 countries, including Russia, voted against.
Well, for the most recent vote in the General Assembly, you saw an increase in the number of countries that voted in support of the resolution, including from this region. Kenya voted for the resolution, DRC, Rwanda. I think it's possible to maintain relations with countries and still say that this action was wrong.
There are many variables, and these variables revolve around national interest, regional interest, and international objectives. To start with, the Ugandan Constitution, under the foreign policy objectives, talks about non-alignment. So our Constitution compels us to take not neutral positions, because there is a difference between neutrality and non-alignment. When we are saying we abstain, we are non-aligned to either side of a conflict, especially when they are involving big powers.
It was the third time Uganda abstained from casting its vote to call out Moscow after earlier votes in March and October 2022 on resolutions to call for the immediate cessation of violence and to condemn September's plebiscites in the occupied Ukrainian regions, respectively. The Kampala's regime has continuously justified its position as the incoming chair of the non-aligned movement, NAM, while President Museveni, speaking last July during the visit by Russia's Foreign Affairs Minister Sergei Lavrov, said they cannot be drawn into a conflict they do not understand. Highly placed diplomatic sources told NTV that after talking to President Zelensky on the evening of February 22nd, a day later, President Museveni spoke to the Russian ambassador to Uganda, Vladan Semivolos, ostensibly to placate Moscow. The Russians, diplomatic sources added, have a lot of contempt for President Zelensky, whom they view as US NATO puppet. The 1 year of the war has caused widespread suffering. The global economy is still enduring the consequences, soaring fuel prices, crunched supplies of grain, fertilizer and energy, along with more inflation and economic uncertainty in a world that was yet to heal from the scars of the COVID-19 pandemic. But for the Kampala regime, having to juggle diplomatic interests for the superpowers, the United States and its European allies and Russia has been specifically a Herculean task. The U.S. ambassador to Uganda, Natalie Brown, told NTV Panorama that the Museveni-Zelensky conversation was a step in the right direction.
I was really pleased to see that His Excellency President Museveni spoke with President Zelensky. I hope those kind of dialogues continue. And I hope it leads to something concrete. President Museveni has often emphasized, as you just said, the importance of having good relationships with other countries in the world, and I hope he uses his good offices to encourage President Putin to put an end to this war.
She said the 1 year of fighting has taken toll on the rest of the world, which calls for an urgent peace solution.
Just this past week, I've seen in the papers articles about the cost of food, families struggling to feed their children. If children don't get enough sustenance, especially in the early years, malnutrition, that has an impact on their intellectual capacity. And what does that mean 20 years from now? It means that you have a citizenry, a workforce that is not well equipped to support the nation and their families and their communities. So this is not just about what's happened over the past year, what's going on today. This has long-term ramifications, not just for the Ukrainian people, but for the rest of the world.
In Uganda, where nearly a third of the population lives below the poverty line, the Ramadan Gobi-led treasury has maintained austerity measures to keep inflation in check. The cost of living continues to spiral, while prices of essential commodities like cooking oil, soap and wheat remains high. Fuel pump prices have eased, but remain high. However, there is no end in sight to the conflict, while the US and its European allies have vowed to do whatever it takes to support Ukraine. During the visit to Kiev late last month, US President Joe Biden said Washington will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. On Friday this week, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced more military assistance package, including more ammunition for U.S. provided HIMARS and howitzers, ammunition for Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, armored vehicle launched bridges, demolitions, munitions and equipment, and other maintenance, training and support.
I don't consider it an arms race, and I, reject any position that the United States is, fueling and trying to extend this. Again, Ukraine has been attacked. The Ukrainian people can continue to suffer. I mean, the tens of thousands of Ukrainian people have been killed. 6,000 Ukrainian children have been removed from their families. I mean, the devastation to schools, to businesses, to the infrastructure. I mean, all of that is costing Ukraine and its people so very much. And as long as Russia continues with its aggression, Ukraine needs to be able to defend itself. And the U.S. and its allies are providing the Ukrainian people with the resources to do that.
Russia, too, has showed no sign of backing down. A day after President Biden's visit, President Putin vowed to continue his country's year-long war and accused the United States-led NATO military alliance of fanning the flames of the conflict. The Russian ambassador to Uganda, Vladimir Semivolus, told NTV that, and I quote, "This is not a purely Russia-Ukraine conflict. The West NATO is saying they are not part of the conflict, but you have seen Western NATO leaders saying this is our war and we have to win it, and if Russia wins, it will have a different architecture of the world. From the Russian angle, we are fighting for a multipolar architecture where the voice of each country is heard." He added that, and I quote, "We are ready for peace and negotiations and interactions. In any case, we want to talk to the people in charge. The people in charge are not in Kiev. The people in charge of this are in Brussels, Washington and London. Ukraine for us is a battlefield where the US and Europeans are testing us how long we can hold on."
I'm not going to speculate on what President Putin's end game is, but I mean, we can look at the reality and see this was an aggressive act of war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. It's a violation of the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's a violation of the UN Charter. It's an attempt to grab territory. And all of that needs to stop right now. Again, the devastation, the destruction, the loss of life, these are things that could have been prevented. These are things that can stop right now, and it just takes President Putin to put an end to it.
Uganda's permanent representative to the UN, Adonia Yebare, said Uganda and Africa is rooting for peace while avoiding taking sides.
The African Union has really expressed itself and said two sides need to sit on the table, on the negotiating table, and end this conflict. The former chair of the AU, the president of Senegal, President Macky Sall, visited both Moscow and Kiev and communicated African Union common position, which the Uganda subscribes to, which is end of this conflict peacefully. And I'm sure the incoming chair, the president of Comoros, will maintain the same position of the African Union.
He said Uganda's position remains unchanged for the foreseeable future.
Payoffs whatsoever. When countries take these decisions, especially Uganda, we take it for a larger public good, which is world peace. The payoff is this war to end as we have called for, peacefully, and we go back to focusing on other challenges like climate change, ending of conflicts, and other pressing issues that face the globe.
One other major fallout from the conflict experts have pointed to the shifting tectonics of multilateralism on which the world has operated for the last 78 years since the end of the World War II. President Putin has maintained that the US has unlimited power in the world affairs and Ukraine is merely a pawn in the chess game. As such, the Russian ambassador said the US and its European allies have gone to great length to arm-twist African states during the UN votes. He said, and I quote, "Do you know what and how much pressure has been used by Western countries on African countries to vote that way? We understand the African countries that voted against us and are very thankful for the objective position taken by other countries like Uganda, and we respect that position." Ambassador Brown asked whether the conflict could reconstruct a new world order. This is how she responded.
I don't know if I fully follow your train of thought, but what we have seen over the past year is UN member states come together in support of Ukraine and against this aggressive act, against the destruction, against the loss of life. And so I think the past year we've seen really how important the UN is as a forum for countries to come together, to talk about shared values and to work together towards a more, for peace around the world, not just between Russia and Ukraine, but globally. You've seen member states come together to ensure that grain and fuel reach countries that were so reliant on what was coming out of both Russia in terms of fuel and oil, and Ukraine in terms of grain. So I think it's extremely important to have this UN system and a mechanism where countries can come together and work together for shared goals.
Uganda thinks Africa can exploit this chance to reset conversations on multilateralism, including fast-tracking ongoing conversations on representation on the UN Security Council, the world's most powerful organ.
Tell you one trend that is emerging is that the center of power is moving from the UN Security Council because it is the organ of the UN that is mandated to deal with peace and security issues, to maintenance of international peace and security. But because the way the UN Charter was designed, it was not designed sort of conflicts between superpowers. It was designed sort of interests of countries, of developing countries that are perceived by the powers to be weak, because they always put pressure. But now, the action has moved from the UN Security Council to the General Assembly. And that is very important because we all now have a say, because the Security Council is paralyzed, because both sides have vetoes. So there is no movement. Actually, the case for the reform of the Security Council now is more loud than before, because the Security Council is paralyzed. It has not addressed one of the major crises since the Second World War. So the General Assembly, where we all have a single vote, has all of a sudden become relevant. And that's good news for the international community and for multilateralism.
The current geopolitical crisis comes on top of other major global crises, such as climate change and the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, financial instability, water, energy and food insecurity, digital disruption and manipulation. For the most part, Uganda and Africa remain caught between a rock and hard place.